Okay, so let's just quickly give you an overview. Is there going to be an introduction? No, this is the introduction. I'm going to talk about zombies. This talk is actually sort of an amalgamation of like 3 different things that I've either worked on or am working on right now. So as I said, it was a real challenge to get it into 20 minutes, so we'll see if I can pull it off, and you may actually learn something, but I'm not sure. We'll talk about different kinds of zombies, some examples, all right? Because there are different kinds of zombies, as you will find out. And then I'll give you a brief introduction to certain philosophical terms of art, including qualia, epiphenomenalism, and externalism, each of which deserve their own, 10-week-long course at Stanford on their own, but we're going to do it in 20 minutes. Right? And then we're going to find out whether you are a zombie. Right? Now, you're a symbolic system student, right? So you never took one of my classes, right? But you probably talked about zombies at one point. I mean, it's just it's a rite of passage in symbolic systems at Stanford. So we're going to try to find out if you in the audience are zombies, because, as I've argued before, I'm a zombie. Okay, and then I'll conclude. All right. So first kind of zombie is a Hollywood zombie. You might have seen this guy before. I think he was in Night of the Living Dead. It's sort of a grainy photo. You're not the only one with grainy photos. So, Hollywood zombies, they sort of move slowly. They have a limited vocabulary. Usually the only word they can say is brains, right? At least in the first movies. And they actually prefer to eat brains. I mean, let's see if I can put this together. The most interesting zombie in the world says, "I don't always eat flesh, but when I do, I prefer brains." Right? So they must have taste discrimination. If that's the case, they must be able to discriminate things by taste, okay? Which is important. Hence, they have what are known as taste qualia. And we're going to talk about qualia a bit more in a few minutes, okay? But I'm just giving you a precursor to it. So I'll explain that in a little while. Okay. Moving right along to the present, there are also AMC zombies. They're actually a little bit different from the Hollywood zombies we grew up with in our youth. They're similar to Hollywood zombies, but they have better makeup. Also, they don't really say anything. They just grunt, right? And they don't seem to prefer brains, but they do like flesh. Okay, so and it's got to be live flesh. Okay, so again, there must be some sort of discrimination there, because they prefer live flesh to dead flesh. They won't go after dead flesh. Okay. Okay. Now, what about a philosophical zombie? Well, a philosophical zombie is a different kind of thing altogether. It's something that philosophers have come up with as a way of arguing about possibilities, possible worlds, and also a way of trying to understand consciousness. Okay. So a philosophical zombie is an exact duplicate of you. All right. So they're a duplicate molecule for molecule of you or another person, or perhaps an entire world. Okay. So you take a microphysical duplicate in another physical world, and that world can itself be a microphysical duplicate of our own world. So you can imagine a twin Earth off in another part of the galaxy or another part of the universe, which is molecule for molecule the same as here. So that means that there will be people in that, or things that look like people in that Earth, sitting in the chairs that you're sitting in right now, or there are general relativistic things we have to worry about if we talk about right now, but we won't worry about that. But the idea is that they are exact physical duplicates of you and I, okay? And since all the physical laws hold in this world, because it's part of our universe, right, then that zombie, well, I won't say zombie yet, that thing will act like you, it will talk like you, and it will appear to respond to external stimuli just as you do. All right, it will say things like, that Einstein painting over there has, bluish and reddish hues in it, for example. Or if you touch the burner, right, your duplicate will touch the burner and say, ouch, right, that hurts, that was hot. So they'll do things just like you, okay? So they appear to respond to external stimuli just as you do. But there's one thing that your zombie duplicate lacks, and that is consciousness. Okay? And in particular, what your duplicate lacks are what are known in philosophy as qualia. So qualia is the plural, one quale, many qualia. All right. So your duplicate lacks qualia, which are the qualities of sensory experience. So your duplicate actually lacks the experience of that particular shade of blue in the lower left-hand corner of that painting, for example. Okay. But yet, your duplicate will respond to that. If you say, what color is that? They'll say, well, it's blue. It's sort of and they'll describe it the best they can. They also lack the pain experience when they touch the burner. Okay. So it's the painfulness of pain that they miss. And I just had I'm teaching a philosophy of neuroscience class at Stanford right now. We just had a very famous neuroscientist of pain, Howard Fields, who is at UCSF. And he can describe in agonizing detail everything that happens in pain, except for the experience itself. Okay, but he can explain everything that happens, the tissue damage, and then the firings of the nerves going up and into the spinal cord, and then up into all the various places in the brain, which I don't even have all the names for. So your duplicate's world is basically dark. She has no conscious experience, no qualia whatsoever. She is, in short, a philosophical zombie. Well, a philosophical zombie is somebody who's your exact duplicate but lacks qualia. The painfulness of pain. The exact colors that you see when you're looking at paintings, for example. Okay. But they seem to respond just like you do. So these zombie worlds rely on an intuition that qualia are properties somehow over and above physical properties. They have to be, because we've said that this world is an exact duplicate of our world physically. So all the physical laws are holding, but something's being left out. All right? So they have to be non-physical properties. And many people argue, and I'll just focus on this, there are different ways of taking this, but I'll just focus in on these qualities being what are known as epiphenomenal qualities. So we have this view of qualia that's given by the epiphenomenalist. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. So in this view, the epiphenomenalist treats qualia as something, does this work? There we go. As a quality, here I'm putting it there, that's the cue. It's a property, usually of an internal state, which I'm going to say is probably a brain state. Like, for example, if you're seeing colors, something will be going on in V4, which is part of your visual cortex, which responds to colors. So V4 neurons in V4 will be firing. And most epiphenomenalists think that the qualia is some property which is caused by that particular neuron firing. And there is an external property out there, which is whatever that shade is that's on that painting over there, right? Which causes the brain state to fire in a certain way. And that causes some property, some qualia to occur, which is the blueness of the blue, that particular shade of blue, blue 21, for example, or that particular painfulness of pain that you feel when you prick your finger with a knife, or a different kind of pain when you burn your finger, for example. Okay? So for the epiphenomenalist, there's going to be not only physical laws, but also psychophysical laws. So something will happen in the physical world under conditions of experience which cause some sort of internal quality. And so there will be not only physical realms, but also non-physical realms as well. Okay? But we're also going to look at the views of externalism, which is a kind of materialism, which tries to explain all phenomena in materialistic terms. Okay? And this particular flavor that I'll be talking about is externalism. And externalism basically says, well, there is an internal state which is going on in the brain, in V4. There's other stuff going on too, but there's also an external property, like that particular reflectance property that's on that painting over there in that particular part. And you have physical laws, and that's it. No psychophysical laws, you don't need them. And also, there's just the physical realm to deal with. Okay? So you can see the differences in ontology, which are differences in the kind of stuff which is being used in these theories. This theory has extra stuff here. It has qualia in some non-physical realm. This one only has physical stuff, physical causal laws, physical properties, physical relations, and so on. Okay. How am I doing for time?
15 more minutes.
Okay. So the first epiphenomenalist was Thomas Huxley, who's part of the famous Huxley family, and he was a contemporary of Darwin and a huge defender of Darwin. And he wrote a very famous paper in which he came up with the theory of epiphenomenalism. And he basically argued that mental states are caused by brain states, but they do not themselves actually cause anything. So when you touch something and it burns you and you feel pain, the painfulness of the pain is something which is caused by something in your brain, okay? But it itself does not cause you to say ouch or to withdraw your hand. Instead, the neurons are connected in such a way that they go back through motor cortex and they pull your hand away. They go to your vocal cords, so you say ouch, and so forth. So he says that the painfulness of the pain under this view is something which is caused, and the analogy he uses is like the steam from the steam whistle to the locomotive. So a locomotive is going along and moving along on the tracks, has a big engine, and it also has a whistle. All right, so if the conductor pulls the whistle, the steam comes out. But the steam doesn't actually cause anything. There's sort of a sensation portion to it because you hear something, right? But it has absolutely no causal effect on the machine whatsoever. So the train goes hurtling down the tracks, and if you pull the whistle, release the steam, something happens, but it has no causal effect. Okay, so that's his argument. That's what he says that qualia are like. They're the kinds of things that are caused by our brain, but themselves don't cause it. All right. And he also argues that, he seems to be arguing that these are non-physical properties as well. So he was the first epiphenomenalist. Well, there's just one problem with epiphenomenalism, and that is that mental states actually do have causal roles. So, being at Stanford, when I go up to Berkeley and I go through, the shops around there, I see all these blue shirts and sweatshirts around there, and I'm thinking, well, I don't want any of these. So I go up and I say, where are the red ones, right? Because it's the red ones that cause me to pick it off of the shelf and to take out my wallet and go up and buy it, or actually the cardinal ones, the cardinal colored shirts. Okay, so mental states do have causal roles. The contents of mental states do have causal roles. All right. Particular colors actually have an effect in our decision-making process. We choose one wine over another because of the taste. Okay, that taste has a causal effect on us. We can taste it and say, that tastes great, or spit it out and say, that's terrible. All right. Similarly with pain experiences as well. The pain that your child feels when they first touch the burner is what causes them to withdraw their hand. Okay? It's not something non-physical, epiphenomenal in some other world. It's actually somehow part of the physical makeup of the world. Okay? So, as it's been posed so far, we can begin to see what's wrong with the zombie argument. The first thing to do is to recognize that the contents of our experiences are actually physical properties. So these things that we call qualia. And that what makes them causal and makes them appropriate for the kinds of things that we're interacting with in the world is that they're actually properties of external objects. They're not properties of the brain, or just properties of the brain. And they're not some epiphenomenal, non-physical kind of property. This view is called externalism. So who's the first externalist? Well, I like to argue that actually it was Leibniz. Now, he's a very strange one. Has anybody actually studied Leibniz before? Okay, we have. Now, he's a very peculiar philosopher. I mean, he's totally mad if you think about it. He has this theory which is basically indefensible because he talks about the world being made up of monads. Monads have properties. They have windows. No, they don't have windows. All these strange things. But it's a beautiful system. All right? And it sort of, once you learn how to argue within the system, you realize that he can defend himself against just about everything, except it's just utter implausibility on its face. But anyway, he was a brilliant, brilliant man, right? Co-discoverer of the calculus, great scientist, very good lawyer as well. But he also, I think, was the first externalist because he recognized the difficulty of finding the mind by looking at the brain. So, for example, if I am looking at a painting of Einstein on the wall that has all those various colors and shapes, you can look in my brain and you'll see nothing there that's rectangularly shaped and has colors and shapes the way that they're represented on that painting. So there's no painting in my brain. Okay? So there's going to be a problem of finding the mind and mental contents in the brain. Okay? And he knew that from the get-go. He argued that mental states were, in effect, relations between internal and external properties. So the mind is more complex than just a single entity or a complex entity that's situated in just one place between my ears. And back then, I mean, now when we talk about these sorts of things, the analogies we use are computers or neural networks or meatware or something like this when we're talking about the mind. But back then, the most complicated machine that existed was a mill. So that's the example that he used. And this is from his monadology. This is what he argued. He said, suppose there were a machine so constructed as to produce thought, feeling, and perception. We can imagine it increased in size while retaining the same proportions, so that one could enter it as one might a mill. On going inside, we should see only the parts impinging on one another. We should not see anything that would explain perception. So, do you all remember that movie? I mean, those of you who are old enough, that movie Fantastic Voyage? Anybody see that? Right, okay, here we go. We got one taker over here, okay. Two takers. Right, so they go into the brain, right? They miniaturize the ship and then they send it in and they're trying to save some scientist who's gonna like save the world from a nuclear disaster or something, I can't remember. I watched it with my kids a few years ago. I couldn't believe how bad the special effects were. But I loved it when I was a kid. But at one point, they're sort of going through the brain and then they see this like electrical activity and the captain says, look, for the first time, we've seen a thought. Right? So Leibniz is saying, you cannot find a thought by looking in the brain. Shrink yourself down. Go in there and look around all you want. You're never going to see a painting. You're never going to see colors. You're never going to see pains. All right? There's more to it than that. I mean, Leibniz was a clever guy. He saw it coming a long time ago. So, more recent externalists, G.E. Moore, one of my favorite philosophers, Cambridge philosopher, one of the originators of the common sense philosophical movement, who basically said our beliefs about the world are correct. Right? So he gave this famous lecture I'm digressing all the time, I can't help it. But he gave this famous lecture that I would die to have seen, where I think it was to the Aristotelian Society, and he was up at a lectern like this, right? And he said, now I'm going to prove to you the existence of the external world. Here is one hand, here is the other. Right, so it basically just says, there is the external world. Right? We philosophers make things too complicated. Right? Anyway, there's much more to that than just that argument, but that gives you an idea of what the common sense philosophers were saying. Other more recent examples, because it's a recent movement in philosophy of mind, starting from about 95, 96 with Fred Drudsky, who was my dissertation advisor at Stanford. Michael Tai, who's at the University of Texas, David Hilbert, John Campbell at Berkeley, David Papineau at the University of London. These are more recent externalists, and they basically say that in order to have a theory of what we call mental content, where we talk about things like qualia, beliefs, desires, so forth, it needs to be causal because it's going to be part of the physical world. So we're going to need to be able to explain it in physical terms. So it's going to involve causality between world and brain. Okay? And that the contents themselves will actually be external. Okay? The contents of our mental states. And those external contents cause internal states that we refer to as things like belief, knowledge, and experience. How am I doing for time? Like 3 minutes? Okay. See if I can get through this. So basically, I won't bore you with the details. Basically, the externalist view says all mental states are physical. Okay, we can go into more details after the talk if you want. So experience itself is not going to be a simple brain state, okay, or a brain state with a quale that's connected with something outside. No, it's just a relation. It's going to be a complicated relation, but it's going to include internal sensory states in the brain, like this is supposed to be somewhere near visual cortex. This is a brain here, that's sort of the back of the brain, sort of visual cortex, and then there's going to be some property that is causing that, and that property is the content of the state. Okay. So there's going to be causal relations which connect the external property and the internal state. So now, what do we do given that we have these two theories which I showed you before, one of which had extra epiphenomenal qualities and the other one didn't? Well, have any of you heard of Occam, William of Occam? Okay, well, we apply Occam's razor. Right? Occam's razor shaves Plato's beard. I won't tell you why, it takes too long. But the idea is that the simpler the theory is that accounts for all the phenomena, if you line up all the theories which account for all the phenomena, the simplest one is the best. All right? So we apply Occam's razor and we cut out all the extra stuff that we don't need and that actually doesn't explain anything. All right? So we eliminate epiphenomenal properties like Q that the epiphenomenalist is talking about, and we end up with a simpler and better theory. So we don't need that extra property Q, because we have now an internal state, which is the experience. We have an external property, which is actually, for example, the color, or the painful state of the pain, which is tissue damage to the extremities of the body, or different, I don't know, flavonoids in the wine, whatever. I mean, I'm not a chemist, so, but you can answer that. Anyway, so, let me just go back there. Just teasing you there. So we account for experience with the physical tools on offer and no more. As Fred Dretske used to like to say, he wanted to bake a cake with he wanted to bake a mental cake with physical ingredients. So that is the desideratum. What does this mean? Well, if you recall, zombies are the kind of beings that don't have that property Q. So if I'm right about this, that means you're a zombie because you don't have that property. Okay? Because you lack the epiphenomenal quality Q, which directly qualifies you for zombiehood, at least according to the epiphenomenalists. But don't panic. Because this whole point is absurd. Because you do experience colors. You do experience tastes. You do experience pains. So these properties actually do exist. There are actually arguments out there which are much longer than this 20-minute talk to try to convince you of this. But this shows you the beauty, the simplicity of the view of externalism, which itself basically goes back to the kind of common sense philosophy which was first argued for by G.E. Moore and his allies. But nevertheless, in conclusion, it turns out there are zombies amongst us. We tend to wear number 35 from Dipsy because if you get that number, I won't actually point out anybody in that picture. If you get that number, there's usually nothing left, and you definitely feel like a zombie at the end of the race, and you know who you are. So, if you want to find out more of this stuff, come to some of our talks at the Center for the Explanation of Consciousness. There's the URL for it, and I'll leave it at that.